The the recent headlines are that Neil Young demanded that Spotify take his music down as long as they keep Joe Rogan on Spotify. It's either me or Joe Rogan
because of misinformation.
Disinformation, which is such an obvious propaganda term that he seems to have bought into. And the irony to me, so he demanded Joe Rogan's music, and a lot of artists, even from the hippie era, have followed suit.
Joni Mitchell?
Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
Yes, Joni Mitchell, Michael, come on.
Not Jody.
No,
Jody
Joni Mitchell. India Ari announced today.
Really?
Yeah, some people were announcing. Now I have, and speaking of, suspecting people's intentions here, I actually think a lot of this comes from gripes with Spotify and musicians and that relationship. So they're using this as a way in to say, yeah, I fucking hate Spotify too. And now it's all kind of just, the dam is breaking. Mm-hmm. But let's just talk the political or the current controversy involving Rogan. I find it so incredibly bizarre and ironic that artists, musicians, especially ones from eras where it was all about fighting the establishment and supporting free speech and expression, would side with mainstream institutional narratives, big pharma, big tech, big government, side with all of them against I would say, fellow artist, comedian, podcaster in the realm of the arts, and suppress, and I don't mean from a governmental censorship level, but a social type of censorship, demand he has to be shut down. To me, it's the equivalent of saying, I don't want that band on, I want to be on, but you can't have that band on. It's so bizarre to me that artists would take this position. It makes zero sense.
Do you want to hear the conspiracy about it? They're not.
Yeah, Neil Young's got an album coming out.
They're not siding with the corporations. It's the corporations siding with the corporations. Neil Young doesn't own his music catalog anymore. A private equity group does, which I believe is owned by Blackstone, and Blackstone has a big stake in Pfizer. So when
I thought you were blue-pilled, bitch. Now you're back.
So when Neil Young says I have a problem with this, as Andrew Schultz says, it's not necessarily guys in a room scheming it, but when Neil Young says I want to take my catalog off of Spotify and shut this guy up, who's like the most prominent, he's not even anti-vax, but the most prominent critical thinker of vaccinations, the people who own his music are like, all right, that works. Take it off Spotify. Like, who cares? Put it on Amazon. And we, by the way, Amazon is like the saint. Like, we should be supporting Amazon.
So you think this all is just Neil Young is the pawn and there's a corporate interest involved?
Because
I heard a much more plausible explanation. My bandmate, who's a huge Neil Young fan, said, as a response when he said that, yeah, Neil Young's crazy and he's always been unpredictable. I wouldn't be surprised if he's on Joe Rogan in 3 weeks. He's been alone in a house in the mountains. He hates human beings. He hates life. He hates everybody. He's got an album coming out, so he does, even though he's not doing this intentionally, he may have a gut instinct to want to say something publicly. Yeah. And he's like, comes from a time where he's liberal and believes that, and he maybe genuinely believes that anyone standing in the way of getting out of this pandemic and slowing it down for the recovery of it, if he thinks everyone should just get vaccinated and this anti-science stance, he buys into that. It's just like, whatever. But maybe in 2 weeks, I'll be like, you know what? Yeah, fuck the vaccine. And I'm like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
That makes sense. It's just interesting to think
Dylan
about.
is the same way. Like people say, I love your stance on the war. Fuck that. I love war. Like he's just in that way, says whatever he feels in the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about how these artists, Bob Dylan also doesn't own his music anymore. He just sold it for $300 million, his whole music catalog. It's just interesting to think about how Neil Young taking his music down isn't as simple as like you hitting delete on Spotify for Distant Cousins. It's like,
well, there's a lot of corporate machinations
but not for Neil Young. Okay. Like there's a lot of corporate machinations in his removal of his music. Machinations, which makes you think like who is benefiting here necessarily.